Today's topic is cross-cultural teaching and learning. Wheaton's intercultural students have routinely mentioned this program benefit. Being with students from all over the world and all walks of life has enriched my learning experience so much. I'm not only learning theory, I have an immediate opportunity to apply what I'm learning and hear different perspectives on course topics just by listening to my peers. Professors are great, but I learn deeply from my peers too. The multicultural classroom is an increasing reality, yet it can provide challenges for those doing the teaching and training and for those learning. Today's lecture will review a bit of theory on multicultural classrooms, review some relevant research on how the presence of minority culture students impacts the learning experience, and suggest some ways to facilitate a more effective multicultural learning environment. First, let's take a look at a model of adaptation in multicultural classrooms. Classroom dynamics are complex and include the perspectives and expectations of a variety of students, as well as the background and perspective of the instructor. Let's take a look at students first. In a multicultural classroom, monocultural or single culture students are those from the dominant cultural group. In other words, they understand the implicit rules of school and how the classroom and education system work. At times, these students feel uncomfortable in a multicultural classroom. Although it may not be conscious, discomfort can arise because the rules and learning environment that they know so well shifts and they can no longer work off their assumptions. And having students in the class who are different may make them less willing to speak up and fully enter in. Students from diverse backgrounds are from the non-dominant cultural groups. They may feel lonely and isolated, especially if the content, examples, and readings are unfamiliar and do not relate to their experience. It can be lonely to look around the room and see that you're the only person from your in-group. Now let's turn to the instructor. An instructor who's been socialized in a monocultural educational setting and trained under the same educational practice may have many unexamined assumptions about how education works, how students learn, and how one should teach. The instructor may also have stereotypes about other cultural groups, making assumptions about them that are based on little to no real experience. Instructors that have multicultural teaching experience are more likely to be more sensitive to diverse student needs, learning styles, and educational expectations. Effective teaching for diverse students tends to use multiple learning methods and types of assessment. Content typically includes readings, examples, and topics that relate to the broad range of student experience in the room, so that more students can relate to the course material. Professors and ministry professionals typically receive little or no training in how to teach in their graduate programs. They tend to teach the way they were taught, and if their experience was from a monocultural perspective, adapting to a multicultural classroom can be challenging. A few years ago, I participated in a qualitative research project at Trinity Evangelical Divinity School. The research was conducted to help the community better understand how the presence of international students in multicultural classrooms impacted the overall education experience from the perspective of students and professors. As the Dean of Students, I oversaw the International Student Office and had heard many stories of frustration from students and professors, and was eager to be able to share research-based insights with our community to improve student experience. Focus group research was conducted with 45 international and American students and 11 faculty members. All responded to the questions: in what ways are teaching and learning affected by the presence of international students? And what are the benefits and challenges? The research focused explicitly on international students because of the high proportion of them in the classroom on our campus at that time. Let's move on to the findings. For those of you who haven't taken a research course yet, EMIC themes are those that arise naturally from participants' viewpoints. Participants' quotes will be used to illustrate each theme. international students were bothered by U.S. students' lack of respect for authority. Most internationals came from educational environments where questioning the professor was frowned upon, and students relied on professors' viewpoints rather than their own. The student expresses it like this: "In my culture, we're not so critical. We always obey and respect our professors and follow their opinions. If the professor has an opinion on a certain topic, it is usual in my culture to follow their opinion, but in the U.S., the American students will challenge a professor. In time, I have learned this perspective because here, to be a good scholar, you have to be a critical thinker." International students expressed different expectations regarding relationships with instructors. They found U.S. professors to be less available for conversations that weren't about class. As the student says, "I have also studied in a seminary in Taiwan before I came here. I felt one major difference is in the teacher-student relationship. Sometimes the professors are not so approachable and not so accessible. Sometimes a professor is busy or is a big shot here. When you go to a research room, the professor will just assume that you have an agenda, but maybe the student has an interesting observation or something to share." Students commented on teaching strategies that were particularly helpful for learning. Sometimes the research results are contradictory. Some cultures prefer lectures, yet other students find the safety of small groups empowering. It seems that using multiple methods of instruction is likely to support a broad range of student expectations. As students shared, "Small groups are very helpful because classmates are not as threatening, whereas the professors are. I think I sometimes learn more from my classmates." Another says, "Probably, if you're going to generalize it, most, especially Asian students, want all lecture." Clearly, as an instructor, you won't please every person all the time. It seems that some students have a hard time speaking up, or when they want to speak, it's hard to get a word in edgewise because U.S. students are so dominant. As the students say, "Asian students will raise their hands, be quiet, and wait until they are called on by the professor. However, American students have more freedom. They raise their hands out of turn or speak freely without even being called upon. It makes Asians very uncomfortable." And "It's hard to express myself proficiently. There are lots of thoughts I want to express, but I just can't. I'm so concerned with the grammar that I end up losing my point." Clearly, there are ways that a learning environment could be made more hospitable to encourage student participation. Students from non-dominant groups feel stereotyped by others in the learning environment. They feel that they are tokens representing their home cultures. As the students say, "She looks like a Korean. She must be Korean. She has to talk about Korea." Or, "I'm hearing broad generalizations, a sort of sweeping generalization. Asians are like this," as if Indians and Japanese were homogeneous and could be put into one homogeneous culture. The theme of patronizing makes me think of Chimamanda Adichie's Danger of a Single Story. Even a well-intentioned attitude can come across in a demeaning way, like those from the dominant culture need to rescue and help the internationals. As the student says, "For a lot of American students, their perspective is that people outside of America are suffering. They hear from missionaries, but that's different from our stories, from the stories of international students. Sometimes, when I talk to my peers, they act like they're my rescuers. It makes me feel small." Students from other cultures desire to be fully a part of the learning community and persons that others can learn from. They want to feel that their ideas and contributions are relevant and helpful for every student's learning. This student expressed the feeling of being viewed as exotic with a beautiful metaphor. "I wish professors would make international students not just guests, but hosts as well. When you're a guest all the time, you can eat from what's offered at the table, but you cannot offer anything to eat. Being treated as a guest all of the time, there's no exchange. Sometimes you talk about yourself, you feel good about it, you're sharing your experience, but it's just seen as an exotic idea, just to entertain. It isn't surprising that different cultures with differing values and worldviews would use different types of logic or rhetorical communication styles. The question is whether those styles are valued or quickly classified as wrong or less rigorous rather than merely different. Here we get to hear from students and professors. Some professors comment that your paper is circular, saying the same thing over and over again. Well, that's the point. In our culture, we tell you stories, because if you miss one, you can still get the point because you understand the other stories. The way instruction is done here, there is a logical sequence, and that's the only way. The professor says, some of my African students would almost never do anything deductive. They would think inductively. They circle the point and come to the point in a wonderfully suspenseful kind of way. Clearly, this professor recognizes the difference, but sees value in the inductive style. The theme of contextualization takes us back to the idea of quickly judging a viewpoint as wrong rather than different and complementary. This is a particular trap for evangelicals surrounding right theology. Instead of seeing global perspectives as enriching our understanding of Scripture and theology, we're apt to judge them as against our right way of doing theology. I can see some hints of feeling patronized in the students' comments. As the students say, international students are more commonly invited to share their experiences, but not their opinions. Or, there's a shared perception in the classroom that there is just one and right way of doing theology, as opposed to a less rigorous contextual approach to theology. I hope the themes have given you something to think about regarding how you might approach teaching, preaching, discipleship, and any other kind of learning, informal or formal. Now let's move on to some ideas for improving our intercultural communication to enhance student learning.